The profound and wondrous Dharma is rarely encountered even in 100 million kalpas. Having it to hear, accept, and maintain, may I taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning. This is our second attempt to live stream the Stone Creek Sunday morning talk. And we're in a process of trial and error as we try to find good ways to stay connected and in touch in these unusual circumstances. We are all in a shelter-in-place order. We might be experiencing various challenges, health, social, economic, educational challenges. And we're concerned with how we and everyone are doing with this. We might be experiencing some disorientation, a sense of unreality amidst, like a multifaceted, evolving, open-ended disruption of our normal life, daily life. There's a lot of uncertainty, lack of clarity. It's unsettling to not know what's happening, not know what's coming, and not know what's coming after that. It's a chaotic time. We are working collectively with a life and death issue, which we don't understand very well. And this can bring up fear and anxiety. And with our social distancing, we might encounter loneliness and isolation, feeling cut off from community, from the Zendo, from many relationships. And this is, for most of us, unexpected. And so as we meet this, we take care of our health, our safety, and then we inquire, how do we take care of our practice and attend to our life of the heart and the spirit and community and relationality? What supports us to encounter these challenges? And how can we support each other in meeting this moment of our collective life? So this morning, I'm talking to a computer. Dojin is here with me, Sarah, so that's helpful. And this is a loss. I feel a loss here. I feel like the energy of the room is always part of the talk. And I haven't really ever practiced talking to a computer before. I'm kind of still figuring that out. And this is part of what we're doing to take care of this situation together. Disruptions that we're taking on ourselves to protect life. And protecting life makes this a ethical or moral endeavor, and that's the topic of this talk, is the perfection or the paramita, or the liberation of ethics, Shila Paramita. And this is continuing our study of the 6 paramitas as the focus of our disrupted spring Ango. So Shila can refer to precepts, ethics, and or morality. And ethics and morality are fundamental to our practice. And in the Great Vehicle, or the Mahayana, which the Zen school is part of, our ethical responsibility is to the welfare and awakening of all beings. Sometimes people distinguish like ethics and morality in various ways, but I'm going to basically use them somewhat interchangeably today. And I'm basically thinking both of our kind of our inner sense of what is good, and also various like communal, traditional, institutional approaches to uh, talking about what is good, and then how these inner and outer can interact and live together. So, and so I'm interested in questions like, how do we engage the paramita of ethics? How are we good? Is it based on trying to control ourselves? What is the source of our ethical life? How do we care for self and others? How do we engage ethics in everything we do? And especially as a paramita, how do we engage and live on awakened ethics? Um, so we have this, we have ethics as a paramita, and uh, paramita, can be translated as perfection, and I don't really like that in a way because it kind of sounds like there's a fixed or static ethics or ethical life that we would be striving for in our practice. And I'm more interested in paramita as endless opening, endless developing and deepening and broadening of our ethical life. And so the paramita is an exploration. Um, and if we want to talk about perfection, that perfection could be the perfection of ethics could be wholeheartedly engaging an endless process of opening and deepening our moral responsibility and engagement. So, in engaging ethics as a paramita, um, this is to keep opening new dimensions of our ethical life. Shila paramita is liberating ethics. And this liberation can occur in many dimensions. So, as many ways as our ethical life is limited, fixed, or diluted, or unintegrated with our true nature, ungrounded in love, so many are the ways or dimensions in which our ethical life can open and be liberated. Our ethical life can be confined by our limited ideas, our closed heart, our habits, our defenses, our socialization, our ways of trying to control ourselves, our addictions, our lack of appreciation of our true nature, all the ways we hold ourselves back from the world or hold the world back from us, all the ways we avoid intimacy or vulnerability, fully showing up, fully participating, all the ways we turn away from each other or anyone, all the ways we avert from difficult truths. So in this kind of broader sense of all the ways that we open or liberate ethics, we can see here how like this intertwines with the other paramitas: generosity and patience, enthusiasm, meditation, and wisdom. These are all dimensions in which we liberate ethics. And so for this talk, I want to talk about ways or dimensions in which we can liberate ethics or open ethical life. And I'm going to talk about various ways, and then just to say that they all intersect, they all overlap, they all flow into each other. So, number one is to liberate ethical or moral life from a concern of particular situations and or dilemmas to something that pervades our life. So looking at what is the domain of our ethical life? What is at stake in our ethical lives? Does our ethical life only apply to some decisions, some moments, some activities, and not to others? And what about how do we regard the prospect of nonstop ethical engagement? Does that seem like strike us as kind of like a burden? Maybe we don't like no thank you. So I'd offer that what is at stake in our ethical life is that everything we do matters. And it can be hard to appreciate this. We can never see fully how what we do matters. Sometimes we can't even see it in part. We can't see it at all. Sometimes we go, oh, I'm doing something, but it's trivial. It's of no import. And there's contemplations we can undertake to kind of help us open to this. Um, we can consider like, well, what if the way that we're engaging this moment is the way that we would then engage an eternity of moments? What if we were going to repeat the way we live this moment forever? That can kind of have an that can see how that feels and how what that does to our engagement right here. There's a book by a Zen teacher named Sherry Hooper called "How You Do Anything Is How You Do Everything." Karma, the teaching of karma, which is kind of like in the traditional Buddhism, the main one of the main places ethics comes up, ethical and moral conduct. Karma is action, and it is a very deep affirmation that what we do matters and that volition is part of every moment and that we are then responsible for what we do in every moment, everything. And it has an impact, and the impact matters. And sometimes it's clear how we might help or harm each other, but sometimes it's often ambiguous. Um, part of our zazen practice, our meditation practice, is seeing and feeling the various connections and relations between our mind, our thoughts, our ideas, values, beliefs, our feelings, our emotions, our bodily and sensory experiences, and our conduct and our activity, seeing how these are all relating. And part of what we're doing in Zazen is just bringing the light, just illuminating the whole field and becoming wholehearted in this whole field. And part of what gets illuminated here then is our ethical life, how we're always impacting each other. As we come more fully to the present moment, we can more fully appreciate our agency and our impact. Our intention is important, but we also, like we know, good intentions are not sufficient. Our perception and our understanding are always limited. Self-deception is an ever-present possibility. So our good intentions need to be imbued with humility, the humility of not knowing, and vulnerability, and being as in touch with ourselves as possible, and being interested in unintended impacts. So we want to learn about these. They're included in the paramita of ethics. So paying attention is vital to our ethical life. The paramita of ethics calls on us to be in touch with ourselves, in touch with those around us, and how we're impacting each other. And if we're not paying attention, we can easily miss the ethical import of a moment. So this is like opening and attending to our everyday activities. Our involvement and participation in collective moral issues, especially, can be difficult to see and clarify. This could be the case with COVID-19, with racial justice, with climate change. We encounter challenges and seeing what's the full nature of the problem. How are we participating in it? How are we making it better or worse? How can we make a difference? Being ethical calls on us to face what's happening as clearly as we can, both in ourselves and others. And this COVID-19 is also an example of how an ethical issue, a transmission of a virus, uh, can pervade our daily lives. Our daily lives are being reshaped by our collective uh, ethical response. And it's not clear what are the limits of this virus in space or time. So it's pervading everything now. And we can't see the virus, so there's a way in which we need to do this in conversation, and try to find the best approach together. Staying home seems like it can make a difference. Washing our hands can make a difference. So the paramita is about opening ethical dimensions of everyday life, and not in a kind of rigid, judgmental way, but in a gesture of expanding awareness, expanding our regard, our respect, our appreciation for our own life and the lives of others. So this is a way of liberating ethics. So number two is liberating ethics from a shame-based approach to being good. So we may have learned and deeply internalized an approach that basically involves trying to control ourselves into being good through judgment, condemnation, being hard on ourselves, punishing ourselves. And it is a vital part of ethics to work with our mistakes, to work with our shortcomings. And a part of that, a part of working with ethical mistakes is feeling bad for what we have done. And I think, if we've hurt someone, we really do want to feel bad about it. But this is not, I would offer that this is not a form of self punishment. This is arising from connection, empathy, compassion, and caring. Allowing ourselves to fully feel this pain is an important part of confession and repentance. And confession and repentance are about a transformative way of working with our mistakes. Sometimes we hear that guilt is feeling bad about something I've done. And shame is feeling that I've done something bad and now I am basically bad. Um, and and I think it's acknowledged that like shame is not so helpful, but maybe it's good to think that you've done something bad. But I would offer that we're pretty identified with what we do, and so either way, guilt or shame both appear to be ways that we could uh, basically condemn ourselves. And so we can inquire, does repeatedly bringing a mistake to mind, reliving it, and beating ourselves up by by chastising or punishing ourselves, does this lead to ethical transformation? Does condemning ourselves support us to see our actions clearly, or does it rather kind of nudge us towards denial? If I'm going to look at this and beat myself up, maybe I'm to stop looking at it. How would being cruel to ourselves open into kindness and compassion for ourselves and others? And so, what actually makes us whole? And our habits of guilt or shame, this way of trying to control ourselves, these can be quite deep. And, we may need to really look for ways to disrupt these kinds of habits and question them. So if we've hurt someone, if we've done something hurtful, to acknowledge it, to inquire, well, what would be helpful now? We can apologize, we can make amends, we can reconnect with our vow, with our aspiration, our inmost request, and we can forgive ourselves. And forgiveness is being ready to grow from a place of pain and hurt. And we don't need to beat ourselves up. We don't have to add a mistake on top of our mistake. We want to kind of, what we're interested in is how do we sensitize ourselves to our responsibility, our agency, and our impact. And confession is about illumination. It's sharing and finding a skillful way to acknowledge and work with mistakes in a way that opens compassion, opens wisdom, opens liberation. So we're finding an intentional way to work with the past that affirms our agency now, rather than kind of setting ourselves up as a victim of our mistakes. So the third one I have is liberating ethics from a dichotomy of good and bad or right and wrong. So this is not to say that there is no good and bad or right and wrong, but that a lot of our life is not sortable into a dichotomy like this, and that these are not fundamental categories of existence into which we can sort things or actions. There's gray areas, there's ambiguity. Um, the ethical quality of our participation can itself have many dimensions. It might not be reducible to a one-dimensional polarity of good and bad. What benefits another person? What is hurtful? These are not one-dimensional things, and how our relationships and our activity do not have a one-dimensional impact. There can be a lot of different impacts. And sometimes we can't agree on whether something's been harmful or beneficial or clearly discern it. And so, in general, we're not, I would say, this paramita, we don't have to be so concerned about making absolute judgments, unless that somehow would be helpful. But I think we're more interested in entering a process of deepening ethical engagement, deepening wisdom and compassion, deepening liberation. We're here for the journey. We're here for the going along. There's no place to get to. There's no place to abide. There's not a landing point. It's all process. And it's all process with volition in every moment, and freedom, and impact. And there's some potential to enact or perpetuate or deepen suffering or liberation. So the meaning of our life is always inseparable from our expression in this moment. It's not something we find and then hold on to and drag around. The real meaning is the meaning of what we do now, and how that engagement unfolds. So number 4 is liberating ethics from restraint or prohibition. A key expression of ethics and morality in Buddhist traditions is precepts. And there are many, many different lists of precepts, and most of them are prohibitory, or precepts of restraint. They emphasize non-harming, renunciation, sometimes personal purity. And so this is kind of like a ethical starting place. In some ways it's realistic. First, just let's not harm others in these really clear ways. There's these clear ways in which we can harm each other. Let's just stop. So it's like a baseline, and we can live according to these rules, and it can be somewhat helpful, not in itself deeply liberating, but it develops the ground for liberating practice. And so prohibitory precepts or precepts of restraint, these all come under the first pure precept of our 3 pure precepts in Zen. So those are, you could say the first pure precept is precepts of restraint. You could say the second pure precept is cultivating virtues. And the third pure precept is benefiting beings. And these pure precepts were formulated as a Mahayana ethics. So they're kind of like they're kind of meant to address in some ways the limitations of prohibitory precepts as being sufficient to guide our ethical life. So they point to how the paramita of ethics goes beyond restraint to the development of positive qualities of mind and character, virtues, and in the third precept, benefiting beings. And so, rather than just being what we don't do, these second and third pure precepts open a kind of boundless and creative field of all the things we can do. And so in the second pure precept, we cultivate good qualities, cultivate humility, being in touch with ourselves, courage, flexibility, patience, enthusiasm, generosity. Cultivating virtues is vital to an ethical life that can meet the complexities and nuances of what's happening. A rule-based ethics provides like a limited guidance when it comes to navigating, subtleties and layers of our everyday ethical choices. So beyond living from rules, we actually cultivate virtues, cultivate a self or a person that will meet circumstances in a way that unfolds ethics, unfolds a moral response. Number 5 is liberating ethics from self-concern to all-embracing compassion. So we also see this in the pure precepts, where we start with precepts of restraint and cultivating virtue, and then with the third pure precept, benefiting beings, ethics is liberated from self-concern. We altruistically seek to benefit others. Um, we're accountable for our own lack of imagination and inventiveness. We're accountable to making our own unique contribution to the world. um, One way we can frame this liberation of ethics is from being confined within a dichotomy of self and others. Benefiting self and benefiting others are actually always inseparable and intertwined. On one hand, we're positively shaped by any good that we do, and on the other, something good is good by virtue of benefiting others. And so it's not an either or situation. And this is a facet of liberation in all of the paramitas. And it's particularly embodied in the bodhisattva aspiration to benefit beings. And bodhicitta, which I spoke about in February, and dedication, in which the spirit of dedication is that everything we do in practice is dedicated to the liberation of all beings, the welfare of all. This is liberating our practice from selfishness or from self-centered orientations and opening to practicing from compassion and love. Our hearts can open to the suffering of others. And this is an opening or an expansion or an enlargement of heart, of experience, of self-concern, and of self. We find and open and actively care for a deep concern for the welfare of others within our inmost being. And then dedicate ourselves to living from that. So number 6 is liberating ethics and ethical conviction from being something we need to grasp. So here, the paramita of ethics intertwines with the paramita of wisdom. We liberate ethics through opening to the wisdom of emptiness, the wisdom that nothing exists by itself, the wisdom of connection and relationality. Ethics, morality, precepts, good, bad, right, wrong, self, other. These are all empty. And so what is an ethical life with an empty core, without a substantial essence that we can grasp? And this might sound a little scary. If precepts and morality and ethics are not substantially real and separate from us, it could sound like, well, maybe anything goes. But appreciating the truth of emptiness, appreciating the truth of relationship, this is a real source of our ethics and morality. And this is how we live from the ultimate meaning of ethics. And it's important to appreciate emptiness is not destructive. The whole point of emptiness is to open to and appreciate and actualize how there has never been something as substantial, independent, or separate as we imagine, as we think, as we apprehend. Everything is ungraspable, infinite relatedness. Emptiness is not breaking down the boundaries between things. It's appreciating that boundaries don't separate. And so realizing emptiness does not erase or obscure or flatten our ethical dilemmas, our ethical questions, our quandaries. It discloses webs of complexity and relationality. It informs, opens, and transforms our questions and dilemmas. And what might be more scary is when we believe we're separate and believe in absolute ethical principles that we can grasp and apprehend. So, this is liberating ethics from knowing, certainty, righteousness, judgment, assumptions, believing our thinking can capture reality. And we may wonder, well, if we can't grasp it, what about conviction? But if our conviction is based on grasping some idea or some value as absolute and true, our ethics will enact separation and delusion. And this does not preclude being helpful in some ways and for some time, but eventually it will be hurtful because we're enacting separation, we're enacting suffering. So becoming intimate with the truth of relationship and taking care of this ungraspable truth is actually a sound source of our ethical life. It takes a lot of care and attention, moment to moment. We go forth with humility and courage, and we develop conviction, which is not rest on unfounded certainty. So rather than speaking and acting from certainty, we make sincere offerings, and there's conviction. There's conviction in our own commitment to love and waking up together. There's conviction based on our intimacy with our life. So number 7, the final one, is liberating ethics from something the final one for today. And there's more. Liberating ethics from something we do as an individual to something that is fundamentally relational and collaborative. So the relational nature of our life is that our ethical life is not something we do by ourselves. It's always relational. It's always collaborative. It's always happening with the assistance of others. All activity is collaborative. This is emptiness. And the paramita of ethics here opens into how we're always looking for ways to work together, to cooperate. We approach everything we do in conversation and as a conversation, open to feedback, actively seeking and requesting feedback, honest reflections, relationality. And we appreciate we can't actually assess our moral and ethical participation by ourselves. And we're not looking to feedback as a kind of external source of judgment and shame, but as a process of opening to our impact, loosening up our self-deception, illuminating unconscious patterns, limited ideas, immature impulses. We're developing a kind of awakened accountability. Any good we do happens with infinite help. Any good we do has been supported by the love and generosity we have received in our life, and all that love and generosity was supported by even broader circles of love and generosity. So COVID-19 is a shared ethical predicament, and how we proceed is not an individual matter. It's a health issue, but our collective response to it is a moral issue. From an individualistic point of view, we might feel that how we each respond to it is a matter of our personal health. But from a relational view, our response impacts the health of everyone around us. And I would say this is not actually a new situation. Everything we do has always been a collective health decision. But the moral stakes weren't so clear. But everything we do has an impact and bears on others. So we're not separate. And sometimes this sounds like good news because when we feel separate at some level, however we may try to cover it up or avoid it, we also feel isolated, alienated, ungrounded, insecure, threatened, and afraid. So to appreciate that we're utterly, completely relational beings can be deeply relieving and nourishing. We belong. We feel at home in the universe. And sometimes the truth of our connection might not appear as uh, good news. Rather than belonging, we may feel entangled and caught. We may find ourselves being accountable for things we did not volitionally do. None of us consciously, as far as we know, chooses our social cultural conditioning, but it shapes us, and then we become responsible and accountable for this shape that our life has, and which has ongoing impact. We find ourselves enmeshed in connections and relationships we did not ask for or choose, and which we cannot control. We're totally part of a world we did not make for the most part. We may look at COVID-19 as a manifestation of how we do not want to be enmeshed in a totally interconnected world. But I would offer that all this is exactly the fullest expression of our freedom and agency. Our agency only makes sense in connection, entanglement. Our freedom is not a freedom to choose a world. Our freedom is a freedom to embrace this world and our total, inextricable participation in this world and as this world. So we are free now to embrace the reality of COVID-19 and all the new realities that come in its wake. And it's not particularly an ethical matter or a matter of awakening or liberation to see this as good or bad or positive or negative. The paramita of ethics lives in how we embrace it and respond to it. What is the life of awakening here? COVID-19 is our virus. There are some statements out there that racialize COVID-19. This is a kind of othering, a kind of rhetoric of blame and grasping for control, an impulse to try and separate from this virus as a shared reality. And this has led to violence and harassment. And Dojin and I know someone who is subjected to harassment like this. When we embrace the reality before us, it is not something to wish away, avoid, or get away from. It is our life. It is our function. This is exactly what we're here for. We are totally here to take care of this unfolding of life together. We probably had really different ideas of what our life would look like right now, and we can gently let go of those ideas. Social distancing and sheltering in place are about setting up boundaries together. And boundaries are not about how we separate ourselves. That's a diluted grasping or apprehension of boundaries. Boundaries are always about connection. They are mediums of relationality. And what we want are kind boundaries that take care of self and others. And so this paramita of ethics offers a moral imperative to not turn away from or insulate ourselves from our total connectedness, our being in relation, our actual intimacy with each other in the world. even when it's not warm and fuzzy and nice, but deeply uncomfortable or threatening. So this is liberating ethics. And this is where ethics is liberating. So thank you very much. Maybe I'll stay on here for a few minutes and see if questions come in through the chat. I don't know if that will work. I don't think there's anything yet. We hope everyone is well. I think for next week, and maybe even for a discussion group before next week, we are going to change to Zoom because it allows for more interaction. And I could kind of maybe see some of your faces, or whoever's speaking could see faces rather than just, nobody. There does seem to be a little number there, that there seems to be 29 people out there. So that was encouraging to see the number. Oh, goodbye. All right. Well, feel free to, if you have comments or inquiry, feel free to email. Vicky, we are here. Thanks, Vicky. And we can respond to emails. But Zoom would also allow us to have, rather than a kind of one-way situation of actual conversations. So Zoom allows for many people to be in a kind of online meeting together, and it's pretty simple to get it going. So we're going to try and get that going soon. Here we go.
For great Bodhisattva beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. The Dharma gates are infinite. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is boundless. I vow to realize it.